"You can eat my breakfast," the CEO said to the cleaning lady. And then he saw something that shouldn't exist. Chloe Sterling was 28 years old, had a framed business administration degree kept under her bed, and 42 cents in her bank account. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was that plate of waffles on the other side of the glass. She stopped scrubbing. The sponge remained still against the cold glass of the window of the most expensive restaurant on Fifth Avenue, while her eyes fixed with an almost comical intensity on a perfect tower of waffles covered in fresh strawberries and golden syrup. The plate was untouched. The person sitting on the other side had barely looked at it. Chloe hadn't eaten anything since the previous morning. Her stomach didn't make a delicate little noise. It roared. With pride. With conviction. As if it were making a public announcement right there on Fifth Avenue in New York. She continued scrubbing. She tried to pretend she was a professional. She tried to think of other things. She thought of the rent she had paid that morning with the last dollar she had in the world. She thought she should have eaten before paying. She thought it was too late for that kind of reflection. The waffles were still there. She kept looking. It was at that exact moment that the man on the other side of the glass looked up from his notebook and stared directly at her. Chloe startled. The sponge slipped from her hand, hit the bucket of soapy water, and the bucket tipped over. Half a gallon of soapy water ran down her blue uniform like a personal, utterly humorless waterfall. The sidewalk got wet. The uniform got soaked, her dignity washed away with the water. The man on the other side of the glass didn't look away. She pretended nothing had happened. She picked up the sponge from the ground with what remained of her self-esteem, straightened the cleaning company cap on her head, and went back to scrubbing the glass, soaked, as if that were completely normal. 30 seconds later, the restaurant door opened. The manager appeared first. A dark suit, an even darker expression, the kind of person who was born to make someone feel small. "You're blocking the view of our customers," he said in that tone that wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a request. It was an order disguised as politeness. Chloe looked at him. She looked at the glass. She looked at the wet sidewalk. "I'm from the cleaning crew," she said. "This is literally my job here. Your job is to clean, not to keep staring at the customers through the window." "I wasn't staring at anyone," she replied, and it was almost true. She was staring at the waffles. The waffles weren't a customer. The manager opened his mouth to say something that was surely going to be humiliating when a voice came from inside the restaurant. "James." One word. Calm, quiet. But the manager shut his mouth instantly. The man who had been on the other side of the glass was standing now, next to the door. Tall, charcoal suit, a neutral expression of the kind that cost a lot to learn to have. He looked at Chloe with a curiosity she couldn't classify. "She's my guest of honor," he said. "Please, set a table." The manager blinked. Chloe blinked. A pigeon flying by at that moment probably blinked too. "Mr. Vance, she's from the outsourced cleaning crew. It's not possible that—" "James," he repeated, in the same way, with the same tone. "The table." The manager went, without another word, without another expression. He was like a machine that had received a new command. Chloe looked at the man named Vance. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he replied. "Would you prefer to stay outside?" She looked at her soaked uniform. And at the tipped-over bucket. "No," she said. The temperature inside the restaurant was the exact opposite of the sidewalk. It smelled of fresh coffee, butter, and that specific combination of expensive places that Chloe couldn't define but recognized immediately. The kind of smell that says, "You probably shouldn't be here." She sat down. Her wet uniform came into contact with the chair's upholstery, and she prayed silently that it wouldn't leave a mark. The plate of waffles was placed in front of her. She didn't touch it. She kept staring at it, and then at the man sitting on the other side of the table. "William Vance," he said, without extending his hand, just as information. "Chloe Sterling," she replied. "Cleaner." "But you already know that." "I do." He closed the notebook. "You were staring at my breakfast for 4 minutes. I was staring at the glass." Professionally, he tilted his head slightly. "Do you always stare at waffles like that?" She picked up her fork. "Only when they look richer than me." The corner of his mouth twitched. It didn't quite reach a smile, but it was something. She ate. And as she ate, he asked questions. Not the condescending kind, not the kind that was curious out of pity. Genuinely interested, which made her more suspicious than anything else would have. When she, almost without realizing it, started talking about the real estate contract he had open on his notebook and pointed out 3 strategic errors in the proposal on the screen, he stopped typing. How do you know that? Degree in business administration. Concentration in real estate. She cut another piece of waffle. Hungry people see what rich people ignore. When you have nothing, you learn to read everything. William stared at her for a second longer than was socially expected. And then his gaze drifted, unintentionally, to her neck, to a small antique pendant hanging from a thin silver chain. A simple piece, unobtrusive, the kind you buy at a thrift store without thinking twice. William Vance's expression changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. It was the subtle shift of someone who had just seen something that shouldn't exist, like finding a page of a book you believed had been destroyed decades ago. Where did you get that pendant? He asked. His voice was still calm, but something underneath it wasn't. Chloe touched the pendant without thinking. From a thrift store in Brooklyn. Why? He didn't answer. And Chloe realized at that moment that the bill for that breakfast was going to be much more expensive than anything listed on the menu. Before continuing the story, leave a comment about which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story, everyone. William Vance was the kind of man who didn't ask questions without knowing the answers. Except at that moment. At that moment, he was staring at a $3 pendant as if it were proof of something he couldn't name yet. Chloe noticed the look. She touched the pendant again, this time more consciously. It's just an old piece, she said. It's not worth anything. Fine, he replied. But his expression said something else entirely. She decided to ignore it. She had waffles on her plate and too many problems in her life to start analyzing a wealthy stranger's reaction to thrift store jewelry. She cut another piece. She ate. She sat in silence for exactly 4 seconds, which was the maximum time Chloe Sterling could remain quiet in front of an open screen with a flawed spreadsheet. Can I ask you a question? She said, pointing discreetly at his notebook with her fork. William looked to where she was pointing. Go ahead. That proposal you're putting together. The land in Hudson Yards. Are you calculating the appreciation based on the 2021 index? He blinked. Yes. That index doesn't exist anymore. The city revised the zoning parameters in 2023. If you close this contract with these numbers, you're going to buy a property overvalued by 17%, and you'll only find out when it's too late. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something that nobody expected. William slowly pushed the notebook toward her. Show me. She put down her fork. She pulled the computer closer. She navigated for 30 seconds with the ease of someone who does this every day, opened 3 tabs, compared 2 documents, and pointed to the exact line where the calculation broke. Here. And here. If you want, I can redo the projection with the correct parameters in about 15 minutes. William stared at the screen. Then he looked at her, then at the uniform soaked in cleaning products. You work cleaning windows, he said. It wasn't a question. It was more of an attempt to reorganize reality. And today I'm cleaning your logic too. She replied, pushing the notebook back. You're welcome. The corner of his mouth twitched again. This time it came closer to a smile. A man with graying hair and the expression of someone who hadn't smiled since 2015 approached the table with decisive steps and the arrogance of someone accustomed to being the most important person in the room. William, we need to review the Hudson Yards numbers before Thursday's meeting, he said, completely ignoring Chloe. My team identified an inconsistency in the zoning indexes. Chloe raised her hand. 17% overvaluation. Outdated 2021 index. Already found it. The man looked at her uniform, at the cleaning company cap she had forgotten to take off. Who are you? Chloe Sterling, guest of honor. She extended her hand. And you are? Richard Caldwell, Chief Financial Officer of Vance Holdings. Good to meet you, she said, shaking his hand firmly. So you can take this down, revise the index, redo the projection, and notify the legal team before Thursday. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge problem on a Friday, which is always the worst day for a huge problem. Richard Caldwell looked at William with an expression that said, "Who is this person and why does she know more than I do?" William responded with a look that said, "Good question." "Don't worry, Richard," he said. "I'll take care of it." The director left without another word, but with less certainty than he had arrived with. Chloe went back to her waffles. "Your chief financial officer seems like the kind of person who prints emails," she commented. "He does," William confirmed. "Every day, on letterhead paper." She laughed. It was a genuine, quick laugh, the kind that escapes before a person decides whether it is appropriate or not. William stared at her with that quiet attention that was beginning to bother Chloe in a way she couldn't classify yet. "Degree in business administration," he said, returning to the subject. "Why are you cleaning windows?" The laughter stopped. She placed her fork on the plate carefully. When Chloe Sterling wanted to buy time, she handled utensils with surgical precision. "Because my office closed," she said. "Why?" "Because my ex-boyfriend was a partner. And when we broke up, I discovered he had used the company's money to pay off personal debts I didn't even know existed. He emptied the account, forged 2 contracts with my signature, and disappeared to Atlanta before I could do anything." She said all of this in the same tone as someone telling their coffee order. "The business went bankrupt. My name became tied to the debts. It took me 8 months to prove the signatures were forged, but the lawsuit is still ongoing. Meanwhile, rent doesn't wait." William said nothing for a moment. "Bankruptcy isn't a lack of intelligence," she continued, before he could offer any kind of pity she hadn't asked for. "It's a lack of luck with the people you choose. I chose wrong. I learned. I moved on." "Your resume," he said slowly, "ruined before I was." She took her fork back. "But I'm still here. So it's the resume that's going to have to update itself, not me." Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of before. A different kind of silence. The kind that settles when 2 people are thinking the same thing without having the courage to say it yet. William closed the notebook. "You would redo this Hudson Yards projection." "I already said I would. I'm not asking if you can. I'm asking if you would accept doing it officially." He folded his hands on the table with that CEO posture he probably practiced in the mirror. "I have a meeting in 3 days with investors who move more than $200 million in real estate contracts. I need someone who actually understands the numbers." Chloe stopped chewing. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering an opportunity. To the cleaning lady. To the person who found a mistake in 15 seconds that my chief financial officer didn't see in 2 weeks." She stared at him. He stared at her. Outside, Manhattan kept spinning in its usual relentless rhythm, completely indifferent to the fact that Chloe Sterling's life was about to turn upside down for the 2nd time. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. He didn't deny it. "There is," he admitted. "But that's a conversation for another time." Chloe looked at her empty plate, at the closed notebook, at the man on the other side of the table who had just offered an escape from a life that had been stuck in dead ends for months. "What's the full proposal?" she asked. And the smile that William Vance flashed at that moment was the kind that hadn't appeared on his face in a very long time. "You'll need to come with me," he said. "This is going to take a while." Chloe had imagined various ways of rebuilding her life, going back to school, opening a new business, winning the lottery. What she had never, under any possible scenario, put on the list was marrying a billionaire stranger in a corporate agreement. And yet, there she was. The penthouse of Vance Holdings occupied the top floor of a building in Midtown that had more square feet than the entire apartment where Chloe lived, including the hallway, the tiny bathroom, and the crack in the wall she had named Gerald. The view was all of Manhattan spread out like a lit jewel in the dark, all the skyscrapers blinking in orange and gold, as if the city knew it was being watched and was posing. Chloe stood in front of the glass for 3 seconds, before remembering she had spent the morning cleaning glass, and that this relationship was already complicated enough. She turned around. William was on the other side of the room, standing next to a long table with a folder already open in the center. He hadn't taken off his suit jacket. He probably slept in his suit jacket. "You can sit," he said. "You can speak up," she replied. sitting down. What kind of proposal is this that needs an illuminated penthouse to be presented? He sat on the other side. He opened the folder. He pushed it toward her. Chloe looked at the first page. She read the title. She read it again. She looked up. Are you okay today? Did something happen between breakfast and now that I didn't see? No, because this here is a fake engagement contract. She pointed to the page with a finger. Fake. With an end date and a confidentiality clause. Correct, you're proposing to me, in a folder, with terms and conditions. It's a facade agreement. It's not a proposal. There's a clause here that specifies the minimum size of the ring, she said, turning the page. 2 carats. This is a marriage proposal with a spreadsheet. William joined his hands on the table with the serenity of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. The investors for the Hudson Yards contract are from the Harrington family. Traditional, conservative, third-generation old money. They don't close deals with single executives. They've already canceled 2 agreements in the last 4 years for this reason. I need to look like a family man. You need a fresh start. The proposal solves both problems. Chloe stared at him. This is the most absurd thing I've ever heard, and I've already dated a man who forged my signature on 2 contracts, so the level of absurdity in my life is already pretty high. I know it's unusual. Unusual is wearing mismatched socks. This here is a whole other category. $50,000, he said. Silence. Chloe blinked. A month, he added, plus housing, transportation, and coverage of all expenses while the agreement lasts. Once the contract with the Harringtons is signed and the facade period ends, you walk away with enough capital to rebuild your business and clean your name. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when the brain is processing numbers and pride is trying to get in the way. Is there a clause for insufferable CEOs? She asked. Page 7, he answered without hesitating. Cohabitation clause. Separate schedules, private spaces, no obligation of interaction outside scheduled events. She turned to page 7. Read it. It was there. Really? You had already prepared this before meeting me? I had the template. The details were adjusted today. How efficient, she said, closing the folder. It must be very lonely to be you. Something flickered across William's face so fast that Chloe almost didn't see it, but she did. She opened the folder again. I have conditions, she said. I'm listening. First, I'm never treated like an employee in public. We're partners, or we're nothing. She pointed at him. No restaurant manager sends me away with your implicit permission. Agreed. Second, my professional decisions are mine. You don't interfere, suggest, or voice an opinion unless I ask. Agreed. Third, she paused, and her voice became a tone more serious. I'm not a decorative object. I don't sit as decoration in any meeting while some man talks about me as if I weren't in the room. If I'm in the room, I speak. William stared at her for a moment. Agreed. Fourth, she raised one more finger and her tone returned to normal. The apartment must have a good coffee maker. Not one of those capsule ones, a real one. That's non-negotiable. He blinked. That can be arranged. Great. She picked up the pen that was next to the folder. Is there anything else you're not telling me? The question was direct. Her gaze was even more direct. William didn't look away. Details will emerge as we go, but nothing that changes the essence of the agreement. It was an answer that wasn't an answer. Chloe recognized this type because she had already received it from an ex who forged signatures, so her radar was well calibrated. But $50,000 a month and an escape from a dead end carried a weight that the radar had difficulty ignoring. I accept the contract, she said, and the pen hit the paper. I don't sell my dignity, but lending my last name for a set period for corporate purposes seems like a reasonable agreement between adults. She signed. She pushed the folder back. William signed too without ceremony, as if it were just another contract on an ordinary morning, and not the most improbable agreement Manhattan had seen since Manhattan existed. Fake marriage, she said, looking at the still fresh signature. True respect. Correct. If you break any of my clauses, I tear up the contract and keep the 2-carat ring. That's also on page 7. I know. He looked up. She still had the pen in her hand and an expression that mixed satisfaction with the awareness that she had just done something that changed everything. On the other side of the glass, Manhattan blinked indifferently. and in a hallway down below, a man in a dark suit who had been waiting for the elevator longer than necessary slowly lowered his phone, his eyes fixed on the illuminated penthouse high above. Arthur Vance didn't smile. He was the type who didn't smile, but his eyes had the expression of someone who had just seen an opportunity arise. The next morning, a black suitcase and a battered backpack arrived together at the entrance of a mansion in the Hamptons, and Chloe Sterling looked at the facade of the place with the expression of someone trying to decide if she was living a dream or a very well-decorated nightmare. The Hamptons mansion had 12 bedrooms, 4 living rooms, an infinity pool, and a butler who looked like he had stepped straight out of a 90s English movie. Chloe looked at all of it, and the first thing she thought was, I'm gonna get lost here, and nobody will find me for 3 days. The second thing she thought was that she should have brought a map. I'll show you to your room, said the butler, picking up the black suitcase with the silent precision of someone who had been doing this for decades. Chloe stared at him. Dark suit, impeccable posture, the serious expression of someone who had never tripped over anything in his life. Thank you, she said. What's your name? Bennett, ma'am. Bennett. She walked alongside him through the marble hallway. Bennett, are you a real estate investor? He blinked. It was the only uncalculated movement she saw in him that day. No, ma'am. I'm the house butler. Ah. She nodded. Great. Just asking because you have the exact posture of a man who evaluates land by his handshake. Bennett didn't reply. But Chloe was certain that behind that motionless expression was something that, in another life, would have been a smile. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment in Brooklyn. The window looked out to the ocean. The ocean was there, blue and immense, completely oblivious to the fact that Chloe Sterling was staring at it with her cleaning uniform still folded in her backpack. She placed the backpack on the bed. She looked at the bed. She looked back at the backpack. These rich people have more forks than friends, she muttered to herself, and went to take a shower before the bathroom mirror, which was taller than her, could intimidate her. The crisis arrived before lunch. Chloe was walking down the main staircase, wearing the only presentable clothes she had brought, a white blouse and black pants she had bought 2 years ago for job interviews, when she heard voices coming from the downstairs office. Voices in the plural. Voices at the volume of people who disagree about money. She stopped in the hallway. William came out of the office with the tight expression of someone who is holding a situation in his arms, and the situation is slipping. The Harringtons arrived early, he said when he saw her. 3 hours early, and they bring their lawyer. Why? Because the oldest brother, George Harrington, received a competing proposal from another real estate group last night and wants to compare the numbers before signing anything. Chloe processed that in 2 seconds. What's the weak point of the competing proposal? I don't know. I haven't seen it. But you have the Harringtons' numbers. I do. And do you have the appreciation history of the lands they've bought over the last 5 years? I have it all in the system. Then give me 20 minutes. A notebook, and coffee. She was already walking back to the office. Seriously, a real coffee maker, not that capsule one I saw in the kitchen. That's going to be a conversation. William stood still in the hallway for a second. The capsule coffee maker was temporary. He said, William? Yes? The notebook. He went to fetch the notebook. The Harringtons were exactly what Chloe had imagined. 3 men with silver hair, expensive suits, and the collective expression of those who had never waited for anything in their lives. George, the oldest, had the kind of handshake that tried to size up the other person before a single word was said. Chloe squeezed his hand back with the same pressure. He raised an eyebrow. William made the introductions with that calm CEO voice Chloe was already learning to identify as his mode of operation in high-pressure situations. The calmer he was, the more serious the problem. My fiancée, Chloe Sterling. She oversees the strategic analysis of our acquisition portfolios. Chloe didn't blink. She smiled. The exact smile of someone who does this every week and whose heart isn't beating any faster than it should. I heard you received a competing proposal, she said, sitting at the table as if that office were hers. George Harrington looked at William. William looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at George, with the expression of someone waiting for an answer who has other things to do. The document was placed on the table. She read it. She made notes on a pad. She looked up. "This proposal has two serious problems," she said, turning the pad around so everyone could see. "First, their return projection uses an occupancy rate of 92%. No commercial property on Long Island has sustained 92% occupancy over the last 8 years. The real average is 76. She pointed to the numbers. "This means the projected return they presented is inflated by approximately 18%. Second, their contract's exit clause requires a 180-day advance notice that locks up your capital for 6 months if the scenario changes. The Vance Holdings proposal has a 90-day exit clause." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when 3 men who believed they had control of the situation realize that someone has just rearranged the entire board. George Harrington looked at her. Then at William. "Where did you find this woman?" he asked. "On Fifth Avenue," William replied, and Chloe decided she was going to let that detail slide for today. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Chloe spoke when she needed to, remained silent when she didn't, and answered each technical question with the precision of someone who spent years studying exactly that, and a few more months cleaning windows so she wouldn't forget the value of things. When the Harringtons left for lunch to evaluate the documents, the office went silent. William stood by the window, facing the ocean. "You're not part of the plan," he said, without turning around. "You are the plan." Chloe placed the notepad on the table. "I know," she said. "But thank you for taking 40 minutes to realize it." He turned around. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. It wasn't exactly admiration. It was closer to recognition. The kind that happens when you find something you didn't know you were looking for. "Talent doesn't wear a label," he said. She picked up the notebook. "But it does use a good coffee maker. I'm still waiting for mine." From the side garden, through the glass of the office window, Arthur Vance observed the entire moment. He saw Chloe with the notepad. He saw the Harringtons listening to her every word. He saw William looking at her in a way Arthur had never seen his nephew look at anyone. He slowly pulled his phone from his pocket. He typed a short message. And somewhere, a man named Ryan Foster, Chloe Sterling's ex-boyfriend, received the message and smiled for the first time in months. The storm arrived first from the sky. Then it arrived from the envelope. Chloe didn't see the envelope. She was on the Hamptons' balcony with a cup of real coffee, finally, looking at the ocean with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had survived a difficult meeting and still had dessert waiting. She didn't know that 2 floors above, in William Vance's private office, an envelope with no return address had been placed on the table with printed photos inside. Photos of her, with Ryan Foster. The first thing Chloe noticed was the silence. Not the pleasant silence of the Hamptons, with wind and ocean and birds making noisy decisions about where to land. It was the specific silence of a hallway when someone who usually greets you passes by without looking in your direction. William came down to dinner without saying anything. He sat down. He unfolded his napkin. He asked Bennett to serve. Chloe stared at him for 3 seconds. "Good evening to you too," she said. "Good evening," he replied. To his plate. She looked at his plate. She looked at her own plate. She looked at Bennett, who had the professional expression of someone who hears absolutely nothing that happens in this house. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes. You answered to your plate. I'm hungry." "William, you eat slowly and in silence every meal. You're not hungry, you have something on your mind." He looked up. For a second, there was something there she couldn't read. Then it went back to neutral. "I had a long day," he said. "That's all." A polite lie. Chloe recognized that flavor. She ate in silence. Dinner was served and cleared with the silent efficiency of Bennett, who must have had a doctorate in invisibility. The storm outside began to beat against the windows with more insistence. When William got up to go to the office without saying another word, Chloe was left alone at the table with a glass of water and the growing certainty that something had changed between breakfast and dinner. And she didn't know what. The man appeared the next morning in the hallway near the library. Chloe was walking with a notebook under her arm, on her way to the workroom, when he emerged from the side staircase with the calm step of someone who knows every inch of that house. Dark suit, well-trimmed gray hair, a smile on his face that had the texture of something practiced many times in front of the mirror. She hadn't seen him before. "Good morning," he said, stopping in front of her with a warmth that came too quickly to be natural. "You must be Chloe." "I must be," she confirmed. "And you are?" "Arthur Vance." He extended his hand. "William's uncle. Sorry I didn't show up sooner. I was in Chicago until yesterday." She shook his hand, firm, calculated, the kind of handshake that tries to size up the other person. She gave it right back to him. "Nice to meet you, Arthur." "The pleasure is mine." He looked at her with that attention that seemed like a compliment, but had something else underneath. "William told me about the engagement. Quite a surprise. He doesn't usually act so quickly." "He convinced me," she said with the fiancé smile she was learning to use in situations like this. "I imagine. Do you know many people in New York? A broad social circle?" The question arrived too casually. Chloe noticed. "I have some professional contacts." "Professional," he repeated, savoring the word in a way she didn't like. "Of course." Another pause, this one longer. "I saw you in a photo the other day, in a coffee shop in Midtown, with a young man. I don't remember his name." Chloe stopped smiling. Not dramatically. The smile just faded, and in its place came a different kind of attention. "Were you monitoring me?" she asked directly. No. He raised his hands in a gesture of innocence that wouldn't fool anyone with more than 10 years of life experience. "I just saw it by chance. These things circulate. I thought it was curious, considering the recent engagement." "Arthur," she said, with the patience of someone who has already identified the problem and is choosing her response carefully, "if you have something to say it directly. If you don't, I have work to do." He smiled again. That smile. Nothing. Good luck with the work. And he walked away down the hallway with slow, satisfied steps, like someone who threw a stone in the water and is waiting for the ripples to spread. Chloe stood still for 2 seconds. Then she went straight to speak with William. He was in the office, standing, with his back to the door, which in any other man would be indifference, but in William Vance, who always faced whoever entered, it was a clear sign. "William, I'm busy, I know. But your Uncle Arthur just stopped me in the hallway to mention a photo he saw of me with a man in Midtown." She closed the door behind her. "So I assume you've seen that photo too." Silence. He turned around. There was a closed folder on the desk. Chloe looked at the folder. She looked at him. "Can I see?" she asked. He pushed the folder in her direction. She opened it. There were 3 photos, her and Ryan in a coffee shop at a table near the window. He was leaning forward, Nemet. She had her hand raised, as if in an animated conversation. The photos had the specific framing of someone who wants it to look like something it isn't. Chloe stared at the photos for a moment. "At least they chose my best angle," she said. William didn't find it funny. "You know him." "I do. He's Ryan Foster, my ex-boyfriend, the same one who forged my signature and bankrupted my company, whom I told you about on the second day we met." She closed the folder. "When are these photos from?" "Last week. Last week I was here in the Hamptons since Monday." She pushed the folder back. "These photos aren't from last week. Either the date is manipulated, or the background is manipulated, or both at the same time. The photos show you clearly. The photos show my face and the background of a coffee shop I don't go to." She crossed her arms. "William, you've known me for days. You signed a contract with me. You saw me function in a meeting that saved a $200 million deal. Are you going to believe a return address-free envelope before asking me what happened?" His expression didn't change. And that was exactly what hurt. It wasn't anger. It was that wall back again. The closed-off William of the first day, before the waffles, before the spreadsheet, before the Harringtons. The wall she thought she had begun to understand. "I sent a detective to verify," he said. "Great," she replied, and her voice was colder now. "Let me know when he confirms what I just told you." She went toward the door. "Chloe." She stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Lies always arrive elegant," she said, without looking at him. "The problem is that the truth usually arrives in a cleaning uniform, and some people find it harder to believe." She left. 2 hours later, when a freelance reporter who had obviously received the same photos appeared at the entrance of the property trying to photograph William Vance's fiancée, it was William who went down personally, ordered Bennett to lock the gate, and stood in front of the camera without saying a single word. Chloe saw it from the second-floor window. He didn't have to do that. He could have sent his PR team. He could have ignored it. But it was him, and she kept watching for longer than she intended, with something tightening in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Distrust is the worst form of abandonment, she thought. But he's still here, for now. That night, William's phone rang. It was the detective, Mr. Vance. The voice was direct, straight to the point. The photos have clear digital inconsistencies. Someone with access to resources and her history put this together carefully. And there's one more thing you need to know. About the pendant Miss Sterling wears around her neck. I found something I didn't expect. William locked the office from the inside, and outside the door, the hallway remained empty and silent, while the storm outside finally decided it had waited long enough. The storm knocked out the mansion's power at 10:43 in the evening. Chloe knows the exact time because she was staring at the bedroom ceiling, trying to sleep when everything went dark at once, and the only thought she had was, "Great, now I don't even have the lamp." What she didn't expect was that, 2 minutes later, she would trip over her own feet in the dark hallway and run straight into William Vance, carrying a candle, as if he were a character in a Victorian Gothic novel. He was going down. She was going up. The hallway was narrow enough for both of them to stop at the same time, each looking at the other with the expression of someone who hadn't planned this encounter and didn't quite know what to do with it. The candle illuminated from the bottom up, which gave William's face a slightly dramatic quality that Chloe decided not to comment on. "The power went out," he said. "I noticed," she replied. "I was in the dark for 2 minutes trying to find the wall with my hand." "Did you find it?" "I did. The wall and also the hallway side table. My shin doesn't recommend it." He looked at her shin. She was barefoot, in pajamas, her hair tied up messily, and she had absolutely zero intention of feeling embarrassed about it at 10 o'clock in the evening during a blackout. "There are more candles in the fireplace room," he said, turning to go down. "Great," she said, turning to go up. "Do you know how to light a fireplace?" he asked. "No." "Then come." She stood still for a second. She looked at the dark hallway above her. She looked at the candle going down the stairs. "That wasn't a very convincing invitation," she said, but she followed him anyway. The fireplace room was exactly what the name promised, a room built around a huge stone fireplace that took up half the wall. William lit the fire with the silent practicality of someone who has done this since childhood, and in 3 minutes, the room was illuminated by that warm, lively orange light that makes any place seem more honest than it is. Chloe sat on the rug in front of the fireplace because the sofas were too far from the light, and she wasn't going to sit in the dark pretending she was comfortable. William sat on the sofa. They sat in silence for a moment. "Were you able to speak with the detective?" she asked, without looking at him. "Yes." "And?" "He's verifying the source of the photos. It takes time." She nodded. She kept staring at the fire. "Do you know what's most tiring?" she said after a while. "It's not being accused. It's having to prove that I didn't do something I never did. I've already gone through this with Ryan, with the contracts, with the lawsuit. It gets tiring, convincing people that you are who you say you are." William didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was different. Less CEO, more human. "I shouldn't have been silent at dinner," he said. "You shouldn't. It was unfair." "It was." He got off the sofa and sat on the rug too, a few inches away from her. Chloe looked at him with the expression of someone who hadn't expected that move. "You're sitting on the floor," she observed. "I am. William Vance is sitting on the rug. I was a child once. I've sat on the floor before. Doesn't look like it." "I know," he said. And there was something in that admission that was small and true in a way she hadn't seen in him before. The fire crackled. The rain beat against the windows with the determination of something that wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Outside, the Hamptons existed in the dark, and the wind, completely oblivious to the fact that the two people inside that room were having the most honest conversation they'd had since they met. "What are you afraid of?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her. "Why are you asking that?" "Because the fireplace deleted my social filter." "Answer me." He looked at her. "Of making the wrong decisions," he said. "Of trusting someone and being wrong. That's the most common fear in the world." "I know. It doesn't make it any smaller." She turned her gaze back to the fire. "You scare me more than bankruptcy," she said softly, almost to herself. "What?" She turned to him. "Bankruptcy I knew how to solve. There's a lawsuit, there's a lawyer, there's a path. You don't have a manual." She said this with that direct honesty that was the most Chloe thing ever. "And I don't like situations without a manual." William stared at her for a moment. "I've never been compared to a bankruptcy before." "It's a compliment. Bankruptcy is serious." "Thank you, I think." And then, the funniest and most inevitable thing happened at the same time. They both laughed. It wasn't planned, it wasn't a performance, it was that laughter that escapes when tension finds a leak and decides to escape through it. When the laughter passed, the silence that remained was different from before. Closer, warmer. Or it was the fireplace. But Chloe had a degree in business administration and knew how to calculate variables, not the fireplace. William looked at her neck. At the pendant, slowly, with a hesitation she had never seen in him, he raised his hand and lightly touched the piece with the tips of his fingers. It wasn't invasive, it was almost reverent. As if he were touching something he recognized from somewhere he couldn't name yet. "Where did that come from again?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "I told you. A thrift store in Brooklyn." "Why? You keep finding this pendant strange." "It's similar to something I saw when I was little," he said. "At my grandparents' house." She was going to ask something else when she realized the distance between them had decreased, without either of them making a conscious move for it. It was the kind of thing that happens when two people stop paying attention to geometry and start paying attention to each other. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. He remained silent for a second. "No," he said. "I just forgot how to breathe." She opened her mouth to reply with something. Probably something clever and slightly sarcastic, which was the language she felt safest in, when William's phone rang. The two pulled apart at the same time, with the coordinated speed of people who had been paying attention to geometry their whole lives and suddenly remembered it. William picked up his phone. He looked at the screen. "It's the detective," he said. "Answer it," she replied. He stood up. He went into the hallway. Chloe was left alone in front of the fireplace, with the fire in front of her and that tightness in her chest that she was getting tired of not having a name for. It almost doesn't count, she thought. But it hurts. 3 minutes later, William returned to the room with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't the neutral CEO look. It wasn't the closed-off wall of the last few days. It was astonishment. "The detective found the source of the photos," he said, "and discovered something else along with it." He stopped in the middle of the room. He looked at her. At the pendant. "Chloe, I need to tell you something. And you're gonna need to be sitting down." She was already sitting. "Speak," she said. And his expression was that of someone who is about to say something that will change everything. The power returned at 11:22 in the evening with a dry click and all the mansion's lights turning on at the same time, as if the house had suddenly decided it had heard enough of that conversation in the dark. William blinked at the lights. Chloe did too. The moment that existed between them 30 seconds before, that warm, close silence in front of the fireplace, evaporated with the same speed as the cold brightness of the chandeliers took over the room. Rich mansion lights have no romance at all. They are white, strong, and too honest. "Great timing," she said, looking at the ceiling. "Yeah," he agreed, in the voice of someone who is grateful and slightly relieved and won't admit to either. He stood up in the middle of the room. She remained sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace, which now seemed less necessary with all the lights on. William looked at her with that astonished expression he had brought from the hallway, and Chloe realized he still had something to say. "Speak," she said. "You still have the face of someone who's going to change my life." "The detective found the source of the photos," he began, sitting on the sofa now that there was enough light to orient himself. They were digitally assembled. The face is yours. The background was constructed. Someone with access to photos of you from the period when you still had a company made a composite. I knew it. I know you knew. He paused. But there's more. About the pendant. Chloe touched the pendant without realizing it. It was already a reflex whenever the subject came up. What about it? William opened his mouth. And it was at that exact moment that the room door opened. Arthur Vance entered without knocking, with the specific ease of someone accustomed to entering every room of a house that isn't his, as if it were. Dark suit, even though it was almost midnight, a thin folder under his arm, and that practiced smile Chloe had already learned to recognize as a sign of trouble. "Sorry about the hour," he said, without looking sorry at all. "William, we need to talk. It's urgent." "Not now, Arthur. It's about her," he said, looking at Chloe with his usual artificial warmth. "So perhaps it's relevant that she hears it too." Chloe stayed quiet. She watched. Arthur opened the folder and placed the documents on the coffee table with the care of someone who had rehearsed this move. They were different from the previous photos. This time, there was a printed sheet with text and a USB drive next to it. Written and recorded testimony from Ryan Foster. Arthur said, in the voice of someone who is being very reasonable and very concerned at the same time, the most dangerous combination there is. Claiming he was hired by Chloe Sterling to get close to Vance Holdings executives and collect information on ongoing contracts, specifically the Harrington contract. Silence. Chloe looked at the documents. She looked at Arthur. She looked at William. William was looking at the sheet with that expression she knew. The wall. Back again? Higher than before. "This is fabricated," she said directly. "Of course you'd say that," Arthur replied gently, which was the worst possible way to disagree with someone. "Arthur," William said in the low voice of someone holding a lot back, "can you give us a minute?" "Of course." He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "I only want the best for the company, William. You know that." He left. He closed the door carefully, the kind of care that is worse than a slammed door. William stared at the documents for a time that was far too long. Chloe kept looking at William. "You're in doubt," she said. "It wasn't a question. There's a lot going on at the same time." "There is. And you already had information from your own detective saying the photos were fake." She stood up from the rug. "What exactly does this new paper change?" "Chloe, answer me." He remained silent. And the silence said everything. She took the folder from the table. She read Ryan's testimony with the speed of someone who has read contracts since she was 20. She put it back. "Ryan Foster owes me money, owes me a business, and owes me 2 years of my life," she said, her voice completely controlled, which was when Chloe Sterling was most dangerous. "The only thing he doesn't owe me is credibility, because he never had any. I need to verify." "You are already verifying." She pointed at the USB drive. "That came from your uncle's hands. Your uncle who appeared in the Hamptons out of nowhere, who approached me in the hallway on the first day, who is jealous of your every decision since I arrived here." "William, you're too smart to be making that face right now." "It's the company," he said. "If this leaks, the Harrington contract." "Congratulations," she said, and her tone had that bitter irony that hurt exactly because it was precise. "You hired a con artist who saved the Harrington contract, redid your spreadsheet, and returned the credit card every night without spending a single cent more than necessary." He stared at her. "You believed them before believing me," she said, and this time her voice wasn't ironic, it was just true. "Not just now, already before with the photos, and now again." She took a deep breath. "Trust doesn't have a backup copy, William. You either go or you don't, and you clearly haven't gone yet." "That's not fair." "No, it's not." She walked toward the door. "But fair and true are different things, and I've already learned that lesson once." "Chloe, stop." She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. "I wanted you to trust me," she said softly. No anger, no irony, just that single sentence, honest and heavy as true things are. It was the only thing I wanted to be real in this whole agreement. She opened the door. She left. William was left alone in the office with Ryan Foster's testimony on the table, the USB drive next to it, and the growing realization that he had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. And he was a man who dealt with 9-digit numbers. Outside, in the hallway, Arthur Vance was waiting, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. When he heard Chloe's footsteps going up the stairs, he looked at his watch and sent a message to Ryan Foster with 2 words. "It's done." At 6 o'clock in the morning, Bennett found a backpack and a black suitcase at the mansion's entrance. Beside them, Chloe Sterling was dressed in her blue cleaning uniform, waiting for the taxi she had called herself. The 2-carat ring was on the entrance table, inside its original box, with a folded note next to it. William walked down the stairs and stopped on the last step. She didn't look up. The taxi arrived, and when she picked up her backpack and walked out the door without turning around once, William stood still on the step looking at the note he didn't have the courage to open yet. The note was written in a small, organized hand, completely unadorned. Exactly the way Chloe Sterling did everything. William opened the paper with the care of someone who already knows that what is inside is going to hurt, yet reads it anyway. There were 3 lines. "I cleaned your mansion. Your conscience. You clean yourself." The card is on the table. The ring too. "Thank you for the waffles." He stared at those 3 lines for longer than it would take to read any 100-page contract that had ever passed through his hands. The last line was the one that stuck. Outside, the light Hampton's rain fell, with that calm persistence of something in no hurry. The taxi had been gone for 4 minutes. Chloe was inside it with the backpack on her lap, her blue uniform, and the expression of someone who has already decided she's not going to look out the back window. She didn't look. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew that if she looked and he was at the door, it would be too hard to stick to her decision. And Chloe Sterling had learned the most expensive way possible that decisions made with a racing heart usually cost more than agreed upon. So she faced forward. She looked at the windshield. She saw the headlights reflecting on the wet asphalt of the road, leaving the Hamptons back to the real world. The driver tried to make conversation 3 times. She replied with polite monosyllables until he gave up. Bennett found the black card on the entrance table next to the ring box, both organized with that precision that was Chloe's trademark, as if even when leaving she had a method. He brought the items to William without saying anything, because Bennett had a doctorate in invisibility and also a master's in knowing when not to speak. William picked up the ring box. He opened it. The 2-carat diamond was there, in its place, unscratched, untouched. Exactly as it had been delivered. Chloe hadn't worn that ring out of vanity or comfort. She had worn it because the contract required it, and because she fulfilled what she signed. Unlike some people. He closed the box. He held it in his hand for a time that Bennett diplomatically pretended not to notice. "Did she take anything from the house?" William asked. "Nothing, sir," Bennett replied. "Only the belongings she arrived with." William thought of the backpack that had gone, of the blue uniform that had returned with her, of the limitless card that lay on the table untouched. "If I wanted your billions, I would have kept the card." He hadn't even read that yet. But he already knew. The room in Brooklyn had a window that faced the building next door, a single bed with a faded blue bedspread, and a yellow bedside lamp that flickered slightly when someone turned on the shower upstairs. Chloe walked in, put her backpack on the floor, and sat on the bed. She stared at the wall. The wall had nothing on it. It was just a wall. But sometimes a wall is exactly what you need to look at, when you don't want to think about anything specific and end up thinking about everything. She thought of the waffles, of the wrong spreadsheet, of Bennett and his investor handshakes, of the fireplace, of the candle, of William saying, "I just forgot how to breathe," in that voice that didn't belong to any CEO. Then she thought of Ryan's testimony on the table, of the face of William looking at that paper. The problem wasn't their lie, she thought. It was his doubt. The lamp flickered twice. "I know," she said to the lamp. "You're having trouble too." William's phone rang at 8:41 in the morning. He was in the mansion's office, standing in front of the window looking out at the wet garden, with the ring box in his hand and the folded note in his pocket, when the detective's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus," he answered. "Mr. Vance." The detective's voice was direct, the kind that doesn't build suspense because it doesn't need to. I have the full report. The photos are fake, confirmed by digital forensic analysis. The composition was made by a technician hired in Newark, paid in cash, with no direct tracking. But we found the intermediary. Pause. The payment came from an account linked to Arthur Vance. William was silent. And there's more, Marcus continued. Ryan Foster's testimony. He was filmed in a room we identified as being owned by a shell company registered in Delaware. This company has a single hidden partner, the same name, Arthur. Yes, sir. William closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He opened them. And the pendant, he asked. You mentioned you had found something. Yes. This is the part you need to listen to carefully. A longer pause this time. The pendant Miss Sterling wears belonged to a woman named Dorothy Harper. She was the original partner of Mr. James Vance, your grandfather, in the founding of Vance Holdings in 1989. The original incorporation documents show a 50% stake for each party. William stopped breathing. Dorothy Harper, Marcus continued, was Chloe Sterling's grandmother. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when the entire world reorganizes itself in a single sentence and you need a moment to find where things ended up. The documents were altered, William said. It wasn't a question. In 2001, signature of Mr. Arthur Vance as representative of the estate of Mr. James Vance. The Harper family was removed from the records. Marcus paused. Mr. Vance, Miss Sterling isn't just innocent. She is legally the co-owner of half the empire you direct. William looked at the ring box in his hand, at the note in his pocket, at the table where the black card still lay, untouched. He grabbed his car keys before Marcus finished speaking. Bennett appeared at the office door in time to see William crossing the hallway with his jacket in hand and keys in the other. Sir? Brooklyn, William said without stopping. Should I prepare the car with a driver? No. Should I notify anyone? Should I, Bennett? Yes, sir. The real coffee maker. Buy it today. The best one they have. Bennett stood still in the hallway for a second, and then, for the first and only time in 22 years of service, he did something that wasn't in the protocol. He smiled. William's taxi arrived on Chloe's Street in Brooklyn at 10:15 in the morning. He got out. He looked at the brick building with peeling paint at the entrance and the crooked fire escape on the left side. He took a deep breath. He went up. He knocked on the door of room 276. On the other side, a pause. Then footsteps. Then silence again. The kind that happens when someone looks through the peephole and doesn't know what to do with what they saw. I know you're in there, he said to the door. And I know you're thinking about not opening it. Silence. Chloe. I know who Dorothy Harper was. The door opened. And the expression on Chloe Sterling's face was that of someone who had just heard a name she never expected to hear from William Vance's mouth, about a pendant bought for $3 in a Brooklyn thrift store, which held a secret of more than 30 years. Chloe opened the door with the expression of someone who had spent the whole night convincing herself that she had made the right decision, and was now looking at the main reason why the decision was complicated. William Vance was in the hallway of her building in Brooklyn, in a suit, without a driver, with his hair slightly messy for the first time since she'd known him, which meant he had rushed out and hadn't noticed. She looked at his hair. He didn't notice she was looking at his hair. You came to Brooklyn in a suit, she said. I did. By car. Driving yourself. Yes. You have a driver, William. You pay a salary to a person whose specific job is to drive for you. I know. And you came alone anyway. I did. She stared at him for a second. Your hair is messy, she said. He automatically reached his hand to his hair, found the problem, tried to fix it with 2 fingers. It got worse. I know who Dorothy Harper was, he said, giving up on his hair. I heard you the first time, she replied. Come in. Room 276 was exactly what it looked like from the outside, small, honest, and without any pretense of being anything else. A bed, a table, 2 chairs that didn't match, a window with a view of the wall of the building next door, and the yellow bedside lamp that flickered every time the neighbor upstairs turned on the shower. William walked in. He stood in the middle of the room because sitting down seemed to require a decision about which of the 2 chairs to choose, and both had visible structural problems. You can sit, she said, sitting on one of them. This one won't fall. The other one falls if you lean to the left. He sat on the correct chair with the care of someone who takes information seriously. They sat in silence for a moment. The apartment had that specific silence of small places where people think too loudly. First, he said without preamble, I came to apologize. She crossed her arms. No explanation, he continued. No justification. No list of mitigating circumstances. He said this directly without the CEO armor, without the calculated tone. I was wrong. I should have trusted you before any paper reached my desk. I didn't. I'm sorry. Chloe stared at him. You're apologizing without trying to explain yourself. I'm trying. That's very difficult for you. It is, yes, I know. A pause. Keep going. He opened the notebook he had brought. He turned it in her direction. On the screen there was a scanned photo. Black and white, slightly faded, with that specific quality of images that existed before everyone had a camera in their pocket. Two people in an old office room, each holding a pen, a document between them on the table. On the left side, a dark-haired man Chloe didn't recognize. On the right side, a woman with a calm smile and a pendant around her neck. The same pendant. Chloe took the notebook with both hands. She stared at the photo. This is, she began. Dorothy Harper and James Vance, William said. My grandfather. Photo taken in 1989, the day they signed the founding documents of Vance Holdings. A 50% stake for each. The apartment became very silent. The lamp flickered. The neighbor upstairs was taking a shower. Chloe didn't take her eyes off the photo. From the woman with the pendant. From the smile she recognized from old Sundays, from afternoons in the kitchen, from a specific afternoon when she was 16, and a woman placed a thin chain around her neck without giving much explanation. The pendant, she said slowly. My grandmother gave it to me. When I was 16 on a Sunday afternoon, without any explanation, she just put it around my neck and said, keep this. One day you'll understand why. Her voice was lower now, less sharp. Older. She passed away 2 years later. And I never understood. William remained silent. Why did you say you bought it at a thrift store? He asked gently. Because you were a stranger who kept staring at my neck in a restaurant I shouldn't have been in. She looked up from the notebook. You didn't think I was going to tell you my grandmother's story on the first day, did you? No, makes sense. Thank you for agreeing before I had to defend myself. That's new from you. He ignored the comment with the elegance of someone who knows he deserves it. The documents were altered in 2001, he continued. Arthur acted as the representative of my grandfather's estate and removed the Harper family from all official records. Your grandmother might have tried to contest it. She might have preferred to protect you by keeping you away from all of this. Pause. But the pendant wasn't given by chance. She knew exactly the weight of what she was placing around your neck. Chloe stared at the photo for another moment. Then she placed the notebook on the table carefully. She stared at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. My grandmother owned half of $1 billion empire, she said slowly, as if she were testing the words to see if they fit. And I didn't know, and she didn't tell me. And the only trace she left was this pendant with the most useless instruction in history. One day you'll understand. She could have written a letter, Chloe continued. A note, an envelope, anything with more words than one day you'll understand. She looked at the pendant in her hand. A document would have helped much more than a piece of jewelry, Grandma. Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. Not with anger, with something more complicated than anger, which is when you love someone and understand they did the best they could and yet still wish it had been different. William remained quiet. Because some sentences don't need an answer, just someone to stay quiet and let them exist. After a moment, he spoke. They stole more than money, he said. They stole generations of your family. Your grandmother grew up knowing what she had built and watching it be erased. You grew up without knowing there was something to be recovered. Chloe stared at the photo on the screen, at her grandmother's smile, at the pendant around her neck in that photo from 1989. She was smiling, Chloe said softly. In the photo, on the day she signed. She was. She looked happy. She did. At least she had that, she said. And there was something in that sentence that was both sadness and gratitude. which is the hardest combination to carry. She remained silent for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and looked at William with that expression he had already learned to recognize as Chloe Sterling, organizing her internal world before acting on the external world. "There's something else," she said. It wasn't a question. "There is. Arthur doesn't know that I know. Ryan doesn't know that we have the proof." He closed the notebook. "They're celebrating, thinking they've won. If we pretend we're still fighting for a few more days, we can build the full case with the lawyer and the detective without them realizing what's coming." Chloe was silent for a moment. "You want me to keep looking like the rejected ex-fiancé while you set a trap for your own uncle," she said. "In short, yes. And what do I get? 50% of a billion-dollar empire legally restored. Arthur answering for fraud and forgery of federal documents. Ryan sued for slander and complicity." She tilted her head. "And a seat on the board of directors. You have the right to half the entire table." "Then I want 2 seats, one for me and one for my purse." William was silent for a second. "Agreed," he said. "And the good coffee maker, a real one." "Bennett already went to buy it this morning." She raised an eyebrow. "Before knowing if I would accept?" "I knew you'd accept. Your confidence remains annoying, I know." She stood up. She stood in front of him with the pendant in her hand and that expression of someone weighing things that have no proper scale. Then she extended her hand. He stood up. He looked at the extended hand. "Do we shake hands now?" he asked. "It's a new agreement," she said. "No written contract, just our word." He shook her hand. And this time, neither of them measured the pressure. There was nothing to measure. They were just 2 people with the same direction and stories that had crossed long before any waffle or clean window. 200 miles away, in a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, Arthur Vance cut his steak with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believes he has won. On the other side of the table, Ryan Foster smiled with his glass of water in hand, toasting himself to a victory that had an expiration date, though he didn't know it. Neither of them had the slightest sign of what was coming. And that was exactly the way Chloe Sterling wanted it. Arthur Vance had chosen the restaurant carefully. Not just any place. The 11 Madison, Midtown Manhattan, a 3-month waiting list, menu without prices, because if you need to ask the price, you shouldn't be there. He had reserved the largest table. The window one. The one everyone saw when they walked in. Because Arthur Vance wasn't the kind of man who celebrated in silence. Ryan Foster arrived first, as always, because punctuality was the only virtue he had, and he knew it. He sat, adjusted the napkin on his lap, and looked around with the expression of someone who is finally in the place he always thought he deserved. Arthur arrived 2 minutes later with 2 investors at his side. Men with graying hair and Italian suits, who represented the kind of money that doesn't appear on any list because it prefers not to be listed. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, sitting down with that rehearsed warmth. "Today we celebrate a transition. William made bad decisions. The company needs stable leadership. And I'm here to ensure exactly that." One of the investors raised his water glass. Ryan raised his too, a second late, like someone imitating the ritual without understanding it. "To the new leadership," Arthur said. The glasses clinked, and it was at that exact moment that the restaurant door opened. Chloe walked in first. Navy blue dress, loose hair, Dorothy Harper's pendant around her neck, and the expression of someone who had spent her life being underestimated and finally decided that was fine, because underestimated is exactly where you want to be when you're about to win. William walked in right behind her, in a charcoal suit, with a black folder in his hand, and the specific serenity of someone who knows exactly what's going to happen in the next 20 minutes. Behind them, 2 detectives from the New York Financial Investigation Department in civilian clothes, a discreet federal investigator in a dark suit, and the corporate lawyer from Vance Holdings with a suitcase of documents. The maitre d' tried to intercept the group at the entrance. William showed a document. The maitre d' stepped back. Arthur saw all this from the window table. He put the glass back on the table slowly. Ryan saw Arthur put his glass down and did the same, because Ryan Foster always copied the movements of those around him without understanding the reason. Chloe reached the table. She pulled out a chair with the ease of someone who had been invited, sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked at Arthur with a smile that was technically polite and completely terrifying. "Arthur," she said, "I'm glad you chose a place with good acoustics." Arthur looked at the men who had entered with them, at the lawyer, at the suitcase of documents. "William," he said in the controlled voice of someone recalculating in real time, "this is an exaggeration." "It's a procedure," William replied, sitting down next to Chloe. "There's a difference. You can't prove anything," Arthur said, and there was a crack in the middle of the sentence he couldn't completely hide. Chloe opened the folder the lawyer placed on the table. "I'm glad you brought the documents then," she said. The restaurant had gone silent in that specific way that happens when rich people realize something serious is going on and are torn between leaving and staying to watch. They stayed to watch. Because deep down, everyone does. Chloe placed the first document on the table. She turned it toward the investors, not Arthur, because Arthur already knew what was there. The investors didn't. "This is the original founding contract of Vance Holdings," she said, in the calm voice of a typical corporate presentation. "Signed in 1989 by James Vance and Dorothy Harper. A 50% stake for each party." She placed the second document. "This is the altered document, registered in 2001, which removed the Harper family from all records. The signature as representative of James Vance's estate belongs to Arthur Vance." One of the investors leaned forward. He took the document. He read it. "This is the forensic analysis report," she continued, placing the third document, confirming that James Vance's signature on the 2001 document was digitally reproduced. James Vance was hospitalized on the date of the filing. He didn't sign anything. Silence. Arthur opened his mouth. "Dorothy Harper tried to contest it in 2002, Chloe said, before he could speak. "The lawsuit was dismissed for lack of evidence. The evidence wasn't lacking. It was suppressed." She looked at Arthur directly for the first time. "The email that instructed the dismissal is in this folder. The sender address is yours." She placed the fourth document on the table. She turned to the investors again. "And these are the audios and records that prove that the photos sent to William Vance to discredit my reputation were ordered and paid for by Arthur Vance, in conjunction with Ryan Foster, with the goal of removing William from leadership and taking control of the company." Ryan Foster was staring at the table's surface, like someone trying to become invisible through sheer force of will. It wasn't working. One of the detectives approached him with calm steps. "Calm steps, Mr. Foster," he said in the low professional voice of someone who does this every week. "There's a court order in your name. We need you to come with us." Ryan looked at Arthur. Arthur didn't look back. The second detective positioned himself next to Arthur with the same calm. "Mr. Vance," he said, "you will also need to come with us to provide clarifications regarding the accusations of falsifying corporate documents and ongoing fraud." Arthur stood up slowly. With his usual posture, tailored suit, controlled expression, as if even at that moment he were going to maintain the appearance he had built over decades. He looked at William. "You're going to destroy everything your grandfather built by doing this," he said. "No," William replied without standing up. "I'm going to return half of what my grandfather built along with another person to whom it always belonged by right." Arthur looked at Chloe. She held his gaze without blinking. "Some men build empires," she said. "Others steal signatures." He didn't reply. He walked out next to the detective with measured steps, Ryan a step behind, both in silence with the specific quality of people who finally understood that any additional word will be used against them. The restaurant door closed. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then one of the investors in an Italian suit placed the document on the table, looked at Chloe, and said, "Dorothy Harper. I met her once, in 1993, at a conference in Chicago." He paused. "She was the smartest person in the room." Chloe stared at him. "She was," she said, and her voice dropped a tone. "She always was." The investor raised his glass of water toward her. "To Miss Harper," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Chloe Sterling didn't correct the last name. The applause started discreetly and grew. The way it happens in places where people are too polite to applaud loudly, but feel enough not to remain quiet. Chloe sat for a moment after it was all over, with the closed folder in front of her and that specific weight of when something you carried for a long time finally lands on the ground. William placed something on the table next to the folder. She looked. It was the ring box, the same one she had left on the entrance table in the Hamptons on that rainy morning. "It's not a proposal," he said before she could speak. "It's just that I couldn't leave that on the table. I don't know exactly what this means yet." She looked at the box, at him. "The problem with lies," she said slowly, "is that they leave a receipt." Pause. "And the problem with truth is that it always arrives at the most inconvenient time possible. I know. I'm hungry," she said. "Can we order something?" "We came all the way to 11 Madison. It would be a waste not to eat." William stared at her for a second, and then he called the waiter. Later, in the parking lot, while they waited for the car, William was silent for a longer time than usual. Chloe knew this silence. It was the silence of someone who has something to say and is organizing the words with the same care she herself used to organize spreadsheets. "There's something you want to say," she said. It wasn't a question. "There is," he confirmed. "Then speak." He remained silent for another second, and when he finally opened his mouth, what came out wasn't CEO language, it wasn't a calculated tone, it wasn't anything he had rehearsed. It was just William. The 11 Madison parking lot wasn't exactly the setting Chloe would have chosen for an important conversation. Artificial lighting, smell of asphalt. A pigeon walking in the corner with the specific dignity of pigeons that live in Midtown and have already seen it all. But life rarely schedules important moments in convenient places. She knew that better than anyone. William was standing next to the car, keys in hand, looking at a point in the middle distance with that expression Chloe had learned to identify as his way of organizing thoughts that don't fit on any spreadsheet. She waited. She was good at it when she wanted to be. "I remember the first day," he said, at last, without looking at her yet. "You were outside the restaurant with a sponge in your hand and the expression of someone who was having the worst day of the year. I was having the worst day of the year. And yet you argued with me about the menu before finishing breakfast. I didn't argue. I corrected. There's a difference." He turned to her. "I spent my entire life making decisions based on numbers," he said. "Return, risk, projection, margin. Everything has a formula." Pause. "You're the only thing I've ever found that doesn't have any formula and that I still want close to me." Chloe stared at him for a second. "That was the most corporate declaration I've ever received in my life," she said. "I know. I'm working on it. You compared your feelings to a risk analysis. I was getting to a point. Get to the point already, William. It's cold out here." He took a deep breath. "I fell in love with you," he said, directly, without preamble this time, without a formula. "I don't know exactly when. It might have been when you corrected my spreadsheet with the fork in your hand. It might have been when you left the Hamptons in your uniform and left the card untouched. It might have been before that." He paused. "But it was real. And I messed up, and I know I messed up, and I don't have any contract to offer this time. Just that." The pigeon in the corner stopped walking. Even the pigeon paid attention. Chloe was silent for a moment that was long enough for William to start mentally organizing an alternative plan. "Do you know what's funny?" she said. "What?" "I fell in love before I realized it too." She slid her hands into her pockets. "I think it was when the restaurant manager tried to throw me out in front of everyone and you opened the door, stepped in front of him, and said I was your guest of honor." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do that. It was easier to ignore it. But you went to the door." Pause. "I haven't forgotten that for a single day." William remained silent. "So," she continued, "just to be clear, I don't accept contracts. I don't accept agreements with clauses and expiration dates. I don't accept anything that has a page 7 with exit conditions. I'm not offering any of that." "Great." She took her hand out of her pocket and extended it toward him. "Not to shake. Palm up. So give me the box." He looked at her hand. He took the box from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He placed it in her palm. She opened it. She looked at the ring for a second. Then she looked at him. "You're gonna have to do this right," she said. "On one knee and everything. Not here in a parking lot with a pigeon as a witness. Is the pigeon bothering you?" The pigeon is looking at me with judgment. I feel it. William looked at the pigeon. The pigeon looked back. He's not judging you. William said, all the New York pigeons judge me. It's a personal thing between me and them since 2018. She closed the box and put it in her own pocket. You're going to do this right, when I least expect it, somewhere without pigeons. He stared at her. You kept the box, he said. I'm keeping it so you don't lose it. You're keeping it because you want to. William, yes. Drive, I'm hungry again. He opened the car door for her with that expression of someone who had just won something they didn't know exactly how to name, but recognized as important. And as they left the 11 Madison parking lot toward the Manhattan night, neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. 6 months later. The board table at Vance Holdings had 2 new chairs on the left side. One for Chloe, one for her purse, which was larger than it looked and contained on any ordinary day 2 notebooks, a notepad, 3 pens, a portable charger, and a granola bar she ate during long meetings without any embarrassment. The other directors had learned not to comment on the granola bar. Richard Caldwell, the chief financial officer who printed emails on letterhead paper, had bought a new notebook in the 3rd month. He didn't comment on the reason. Everyone knew the reason. The Sterling Vance Foundation had opened its first community kitchen in Brooklyn, 3 blocks from the brick building with peeling paint where Chloe had lived. Decent and free meals for low-income workers. Every day, without exception. She had gone to the opening in person. She had stood on the sidewalk for a moment before entering, with Dorothy Harper's pendant around her neck, thinking of a Sunday afternoon, of Dorothy at 16, and of 6 words that finally made complete sense. One day you'll understand why. She had understood. The morning after the opening, in the kitchen of the apartment that was now theirs, the new coffee maker made the specific sound of coffee being ready. Chloe arrived first. In pajamas, messy hair, a wedding ring on her finger that she still looked at sometimes with the expression of someone who doesn't completely believe it, but likes it too much to question. William arrived right behind her, tie still crooked, with a folder under his arm, and the expression of someone already thinking about the 9 o'clock meeting, even though it was 7:30 in the morning. You didn't wait, he said, looking at her cup. The coffee maker was non-negotiable. That includes priority on the first cup. That wasn't in the agreement. William, we got married. There is no agreement anymore. He was silent for a second. Valid point, he said. He grabbed the second cup. He sat next to her at the counter with Manhattan outside the window, waking up in its usual rhythm. Meeting at 9, he said. I know. I scheduled it. You scheduled my meeting? Our meeting? With the Harringtons. They want to expand the contract. She took a sip of coffee. I've already prepared the revised proposal. It's been in your email since 6 in the morning. He picked up his phone, opened the email, read for 30 seconds. It's perfect, he said. I know. He looked at her with that expression that didn't belong to any CEO. It was just his, just for her. Do you know what I think every morning when I wake up? He said. That you got lucky with the coffee maker? That I got lucky with the person who insisted on the coffee maker. Chloe smiled into her cup. And outside, 5th Avenue began another day without knowing that somewhere in the city, a woman who had 42 cents in her account and a pendant holding a decades-old secret had found, in the most unlikely way possible, exactly where she should have always been. On the inside. Always. And perhaps, if someone told this story years later, they'd talk about the billions, about the company, about the inheritance, about the courts. But the truth is, it all started with a hungry woman looking at a plate of waffles through a window. Because sometimes life changes completely in a single instant, and it almost never seems important when it's happening. What did you think of Chloe and William's journey? At what point did you realize that story was much bigger than a simple engagement contract? Leave your opinion in the comments. And from 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story? We read all the comments. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting moments. Until next time, the end.